Ambassador, we've been talking about some of the more frightening aspects of what the future may hold. One of the questions that's in my mind goes back to one of your earlier careers in finance, and I'm wondering about the future of U.S. and world financial markets as we understand them today. Currency, its value, how that is transferred. There's an age of computers that's going to impact that. There's an age of inflation that's going to impact that. May I have your thoughts?
Well, right now, there are $60 trillion worth of sovereign debt around the world, of bonds that actually you can negotiate by. Put that in perspective, the entire mortgage market in the United States is only $10 trillion. U.S. has a debt of $20 trillion of that $60 trillion. But that's only a small fraction of the debt that's out there. There's the debt against pension funds, there's the debt against retirement benefits, all the medical benefits that have been promised, and Medicare, Medicaid, what have you, involving hundreds of trillions of dollars. The world has never seen a debt load like this in relation to the gross national products of individual countries. And debt has been piled on very heavily because of very low interest rates. This is the first, never in 5,000 years has there ever been a negative interest rate, as in Europe, and now they're prospecting that idea here. Obviously something's about to burst. You can't have negative interest rates with a couple of $100 trillion worth of debt, unfunded debt obligations.
So a negative interest rate is where somebody gives you money to take money from them.
That's right.
And that obviously would erase all of that debt if you gave it enough time.
That's right.
And so the debt now becomes meaningless.
Well, the debt is meaningful because it's going to have to be paid as these younger people move into retirement and what have you. There's going to have to be funding for their, right now the Social Security is not funded. The funds are not there. It's an obligation of the U.S. government. And all these other benefits are the same. They're not funded. And in other words, the United States is going, as this millennium generation moves on, they're going to expect all the benefits that they have been promised, and the only way that's going to happen is inflation. Inflation will start small, as in the Weimar Republic, and then accelerate. We're not any different from operating as the Weimar Republic in 1920-23 in Germany, and I don't think we're any smarter.
Well, obviously not if we're going to be repeating the mistakes of history.
Yeah.
I guess then what that means is that even though that debt could be paid off by the meaningless money that will evolve from hyperinflation, there will be a catharsis in financial markets where, such as in Weimar, you have to start all over again essentially from scratch.
Yeah. They did in 1924. They just threw away all the paper, wheelbarrows. Took a wheelbarrow to buy paper money to buy a loaf of bread.
I remember a story, since you are a composer and very familiar with philharmonic orchestras. There was a philharmonic orchestra in Germany in that time whose contract required that they be paid during intermission, so that the musicians could run out and spend it.
That's right.
Because by the second act, it was worth less.
Worth half. I have a $100 trillion note here from Zimbabwe. And that's the highest inflation rate in world history. I think 5 years before it became 100 trillion to the dollar, it was $1 to the dollar. That shows how fast it can go. They've since repealed the $100 trillion note. But it would take an awful lot more than a wheelbarrow full of them to buy a loaf of bread.
So what should the U.S. government be doing now to prepare to counteract this threat?
Well, right now, of course, we should let interest rates, we should stop subsidizing all of this by reducing interest rates and let the market operate freely and and let the interest rates float the way they should. Right now, we've been subsidizing an awful lot of this, as has Europe, with extremely low interest rates.
The very first thing that happens when the U.S. government does that is that there's a tremendous amount of political pain, because right now servicing the interest on the national debt is a huge problem, and interest rates are effectively zero. If it goes up to 2 or 3%, we could be in a very big political problem.
Well, it would force us to stop spending on every boat buying program and start tightening our belts, as you and I and Roland have to do in our daily lives.
So it is, in effect, a valid example to say, look at what you do in your own home with your own checkbook, and the federal government got a lot more zeros in its checkbook, but it should be doing the same things.
We're the only country in the world that can actually has unlimited checkbook privileges. Everybody else buys our bonds because we're known as the reserve currency of the world. And for the many years, Japan, Germany, now China have used competitive devaluations against us to wreck our export markets and our manufacturing market capabilities. City after city like Detroit, Cleveland, and others have been decimated by low-cost products coming in from Germany and Japan, especially automobiles and other areas.
So it's incumbent upon us to try and get a resurgence in manufacturing.
I think we can, and I think that we have to be careful. We have to understand when countries create a competitive devaluation, in other words, drop their currency way down so that their goods come in way under the cost of our goods. And we know what they're doing. They're subsidizing their exports, in effect, dramatically in order to knock us out.
In fact, that's the crux of the debate today about international trade agreements.
Well, I spent a good deal of my time when I was in government as negotiating trade deals with the European Union. And I found many times the European Union, in self-interest, would deal themselves a good hand. And sometimes not necessarily a fair hand to us.
So occasionally you had to get up and walk away from the table.
We did more than that. We retaliated.
Okay. And we have just a couple minutes remaining. Let's talk a little bit about what you would suggest that the administration of the United States government do. Now, it's probably too late for the Obama administration, but come January we'll have a new president and a new administration. And what kinds of things would you recommend that they consider? I mean, we just said pay as you go rather than put it on the credit card. There's been a sequester imposed on military spending for several years. Should that continue?
Well, it's clear that we've fallen way behind in long-range development. I'm not talking about capabilities today. We have great capabilities. But don't be misled by the $600 billion that we spend and $300 billion by our potential adversaries. First of all, China downloads through cyber theft many of our intellectual property rights of our weapon systems and what have you, so that they're able to build weapon systems at a fraction, many times, of the research and development that we have to put in to our weapon systems. So they get more bang for the buck.
Ambassador, the time has flown by. I hate to have to end it there because we didn't get a chance to talk about wrangling entitlements or the bureaucratic expansion, but I would hope that there'll be another opportunity for us to do that in the future. You've been very generous with your time. Ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador J. William Middendorf II, thank you, sir. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Okay. Thanks very much, Mark.